Back to where we left off yesterday. We're learning the din of what's called Kelish Melachot L'Isser. A vessel's primary use is for something forbidden. And we learned you're allowed to move it, what's called, let's say, the Gufi Mekayme. If you want to do something permissible with it, or you need the place that that object is on. So in those two cases, you're allowed to move the object. So we were discussing yesterday, like even pots and pans. Technically, they're made to cook in. So technically, they're a keli that's forbidden. But if there's food in it, it's not muktzeh because it's secondary, it's inferior to the food. If there's no food in it, then it's a keli shemelach delissa. So if you need the food, the pot for something, you're allowed to use it. But if the pot's standing on the counter and you just don't want it there, you don't need the place, then you wouldn't be allowed to move it. Same thing with sewing needles and knitting types of needles, because you're not allowed to sew and knit on Shabbos. So they're keli shemelach delissa. Where do you have a case that you're allowed to use a little needle, a sewing needle, where you're allowed to use it on Shabbos? So let's say somebody has a little splinter, okay? And it's not very deep, because if it's very deep, you're going to inevitably make it bleed. But let's say it's very superficial, and I need to take the needle, a sewing needle, to be able to take out the splinter. So then I'm doing it for something permissible, because it's not for sure going to bleed. If it's for sure going to bleed, you're not allowed to do it. But it's not for sure it's going to bleed, so you'd be allowed to do it. So then, that would be a case where you'd be allowed to use a needle on Shabbos. What?
You don't consider the fact that you use the needle for something that was not meant to be used usually?
That's what I'm saying, but on Shabbos you would be allowed to use it for permissible use, even though it's not normally used for that.
I'm saying the fact that that needle is meant to be for sewing only, and you use it for something else, that doesn't give you the heter to use it?
I'm saying it does. That's what I'm saying. Okay, next is, and this is very important thing, candlesticks.
Doesn't become a klishma.
What?
Doesn't become a klishma.
Who?
This needle.
No, a needle is primarily used to cook. To sew and sewing.
So everything goes by the primary use.
The primary use of it, yes. If it's equally heter and mutter, then it's not muktzeh. But if it's more designated for something forbidden, then you wouldn't be allowed to use it. Now,
for example, if you're on the floor, somebody can step on it.
no, if it's a dangerous situation, then muktzeh doesn't apply. Like, technically, if somebody breaks a glass on the floor, broken glass is not a keli anymore. So technically, it's muktzeh. So technically, if somebody breaks a bottle on the floor, by mistake, or a glass on the floor, halachic, you would technically have to leave it there. But halacha says, no, you could clean it up, because it could be dangerous. Somebody's going to cut themselves, or whatever it is. Now, there's a din like, what? Why are they muktzeh? It's keli shemelach leheter. It's allowed. Why not? Okay, next. Because it's not usable. Something that breaks on Shabbos, and it's not usable for the same usage it was used for, it's not a vessel anymore, it becomes muktzeh.
There are a lot of things around us that are not usable, so they are muktzeh if you're not usable.
Yeah.
Like a broomstick?
We'll learn about brooms.
No, broomstick, I'm just saying a piece of wood.
A piece of wood, yeah, it's muktzeh.
Oh, really?
Not really, no, fake. It's fake muktzeh. Wait one second. Let's go to the next thing. Candlesticks. Not the ones you lit that Shabbos. Candlesticks that you lit that Shabbos are completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. But candlesticks, let's say, that you didn't use for Shabbos. You just had an extra pair of candlesticks and they're on the table. Then normally candlesticks are used to light candles. So it's a vessel whose primary use is for forbidden. But you didn't light it that Shabbos. So therefore, what happens if somebody left it on the table and now you need the place on the table? Or somebody wants to take it to hit somebody with. I don't know, what else would they use it for? So then it's not muktzeh. That for those two purposes you're allowed to move it. But a candlestick that was lit that Shabbos is completely muktzeh for the entire Shabbos. You can't move it at all.
If you're afraid someone's going to steal it,
That it's kedli shemachta l'isi, you also can't do
most
that.
cases you can't.
No. No.
Why is it the one that you lit this week? Why
The reason why you lit the one that what you lit yet that week is muktzeh is because the flame is muktzeh. This is the basis of the flame, so therefore it becomes as muktzeh as the flame. The bus is for muktzeh, and therefore, in fact, there's a very interesting Yiddish custom. No, but it burnt into Shabbos too.
What if you have an emergency?
I'm not talking about emergencies. Emergencies are emergencies. It depends. Some people what emergency is.
Let's say that you have the candlelight and you smell gas in the oven.
So then you just close the gas.
Well, no, but you don't know where the gas coming from.
No, okay, but we're not talking about dangerous situations. By some people, if they can't get proper color, flavor ice cream, it's an emergency. You have to call 911. I mean, we're not talking about those emergencies. Those are, yeah, emergency. Now, there's an old Yiddish minig that before you light the candles on the table, you put challah on the table. You put challah on the table or a sefer on the table. You put something on the table before you light candles. Why is that custom done, that you put challah on the table before you light Shabbos candles? It really doesn't have to be done before. Yeah, you have to do it before you lit the candles. Now, we just learned the candles that you lit that Shabbos remain muktzeh the entire Shabbos. Now, there's a din that a base of muktzeh is as muktzeh as a thing it's a base for. That means if you lit candles on the table, yeah, that table is a base of the candle. So therefore you cannot move that table on Shabbos. You can't move that table at all on Shabbos. For any reason. You can use the table because muktzeh doesn't mean touching, muktzeh means moving. We learned that already. 1 second. So therefore, the table would be forbidden to move. What do you gain when you put challah down? The challah is more valuable to you than the flame. And the din is that something is a basis for muktzeh and non-muktzeh. And the non-muktzeh is more valuable than the muktzeh, so then it's not a base for muktzeh anymore. So in other words, if you have challah, let's say you lit challah, candles on the table, and now you decide no, you have to move the table because whatever. You can't move it all the entire Shabbos. If I put a challah down on the table, so while the candles are burning, you can't move it. But after the candles are extinguished, then you would be allowed to move the table. Why would you be allowed to move the table? Because the table is a base for muktzeh and not muktzeh, and therefore you can move it. So that's why the minig is you put challah on the table. What?
If you have a guest that just came in and you want to accommodate him on that table, can you move the table to accommodate him while
No.
the candle is lighted?
No.
Unless the candle is off.
No, even then it said there remains muktzeh the entire Shabbos. Completely muktzeh.
Even if you had a challah on it.
No, if you had a challah on it, after the candles are out, you can move the table.
You can ask the boy to do or not even the boy?
They shouldn't ask a guy by muktzeh.
By Muktzeh, you can ask the boy.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, not in this case.
In this case,
No.
What if you put a challah on a tray on the table, the candlestick on the tray on the table? This way you can-
Some people want to move it. They used to have a tray under the candlesticks. So they'll put a siddur, so they say they can move it for tomorrow morning.
That's what I said.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could-
So let's say for,
No issue.
huh?
We could do that?
No. Not according to the Alter Rebbe. According to others, you could, but the Alter Rebbe holds you can't. And not only the Alter Rebbe, a lot of poskim hold you can't. Let me explain what we're talking about here. Let's say this is a candle holder. Okay? So it's muktzeh. I'm not lighting this candle, Shabbos. And this is a tray that's holding the candle. So now the tray is a base for the candle. Correct? So what happens if I put a challah on the tray? Not on the table. Before I light Shabbos candles, I put a challah or a siddur on the tray. Then, seemingly, the tray is a base for muktzeh and non-muktzeh. So seemingly then, after the candles are out, I should be allowed to pick up the tray and move the tray. Right? Let's say Friday night you don't have guests, but you lit candles on the table, and Shabbos morning you're having a bunch of guests and you need the place. Yeah, so I'll think of an eitzah. I'll put the candles on the tray. I'll put a challah on the tray or siddur on the tray. And then after the candles are out, they can pick up, because now the tray is the base for the siddur and the challah also. So I'll pick up the tray and move it away. So there are many poskim that hold you can't, that you could. There are poskim that say you could. The Alter Rebbe holds you can't. The Alter Rebbe holds you can't because that's not what the tray is made for. The table is made to put a lot of things on. The tray is not made to put a challah on. It's like, what are you cheating? You know what I mean? That's the word. But now it's not only the Alter Rebbe, a lot of poskim hold you can't. There are poskim that hold you could. What? Same thing with Hanukkah candles. You don't do it. No, by Hanukkah, the Alter Rebbe holds you can't do that either.
What if you use a challah board?
No.
So it's made for challahs.
Nah. Doesn't look like that. Okay, next. Now, to give you an example, we don't even think. A ruler. You know what a ruler is? Okay. Measuring cups, thermometers, scales. Say you weigh yourself, even if it's not electric. If it's digital, for sure you can't use it on Shabbos. So besides the fact, so what's the din of all these things? Now rulers, measuring cups, thermometers, scales are all made to measure. Measuring on Shabbos is rabbinically forbidden unless if it's for the purpose of a mitzvah. For instance, you want to measure if a mikveh has a proper amount of water in it. Or you want to measure if a matzah is the proper size, or, amount or not, the proper weight, whatever. So then you're allowed to measure on Shabbos for the sake of a mitzvah. Just to measure on Shabbos is forbidden. Because a ruler is made to measure, so a ruler is primarily keli shemalachti le'isr. Right? So you can move it if you left the ruler on the table. Or what happens if somebody needs a bookmarker? So they'll stick the ruler into the book, to keep the page. So then you're using it for something permissible. Then you would be allowed to. Measuring cups. Now normally measuring, those cups, they have the lines, the measurements, yeah? So that's the keli shemalachti le'isr. But what happens if I want to take a cup of water from? I'm not measuring anything, I'm just taking the... So if I want to do something with the cup itself, for instance, it's going to get stolen or ruined and I bring it in or whatever, and I don't need the place, something like that, I wouldn't be allowed to move it. But if I need the place or I want to do something permissible with it, i.e., I want to drink a cup of water with it, then it's not muktzeh. Scales, again, scales are, you're not allowed to measure on Shabbos.
To measure revius yain on Shabbos?
Revius wine is measuring in volume, not in weight. Yeah, you can measure in volume then.
You can put in a measuring cup.
Yeah. If you need to know, is the Kiddush cup big enough, for the size of a revius to make Kiddush, yeah, you would be allowed to.
You need to measure the medicine to...
No, so it says, Taka, what happens if somebody has to take a certain amount of medicine? Yeah? So normally you have, let's say, the syringe, and you take it and you pull it up and you see exactly, so Shabbos you're not allowed to do that. You have to want to approximate, you'll get pretty close. Huh?
There's a cup that also have the measure.
So you can't do exact measurement, you can approximate.
What about food for babies, medication?
I'm saying medication, if possible, you shouldn't measure exactly. For food, you can measure.
It should be the other way around, you would think.
What?
Medicine is more important than food.
Yeah, but medication, because the whole question, today they're much more lenient, but the question is, technically, you're not supposed to take medicine on Shabbat. I'm not talking life-endangering situation. Technically, a person should not take medicine on Shabbos because years ago, medicine was made. Everybody would grind herbs. How did they make medicine? They would grind herbs, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So the Chacham said you can't take medicine on Shabbos because you might grind the herbs. Today, they paskin it's much more lenient because today we don't do it. People don't make your own herbs. You go to a store and you buy it from a pharmacy. You don't. It's coming back into style. Might be a problem, by the way.
It was just the reason why it's illegal, it's possible to
value.
It's part of business, correct.
That's the problem. Why is it that it's okay to measure for Shabbos in Yemen?
Because a mitzvah outweighs the rabbinic prohibition.
Like
But
measuring
the
the
concern is still there. It's-
Not if it's a mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah, you're doing something holy, so you remember that you shouldn't write it.
measuring the meter or something.
That you would be allowed to do. Machashim so meiser mein merbe mein kim shvlag out der bkhanan kashemer lot es bach zak so figre belam ter mit